Hello, welcome to the True Crime Uncut podcast. I'm Hayley Rhodes. I'm joined by Conchie-Power and Hannah Webster. We are talking today about the Southport attack of the 29th of July 2024. This was an incident where three little girls, Alice, Elsie and Bibi, were murdered by a guy called Axel Rudakubana in a completely unprovoked attack at a Taylor Swift-themed dance class. And it was a huge event that absolutely rocked the country at the time and still continues to. And an inquiry into the events of that day and the events leading up to it have opened at Liverpool Town Hall. So, Hannah, could you just tell us a little bit more about what happened on that day?
Yeah, I think it's really chilling exactly what happened. There's these girls, having a nice time, making Taylor Swift friendship bracelets, enjoying themselves. And out of nowhere, Axel Rudakubana comes in and begins randomly stabbing them and takes the lives of three young girls. And you can't even begin to imagine. You have to ask yourself why. But yeah, I think when the news broke that this had happened, nobody could get their head around exactly why this had taken place, and who is this person? Why are they targeting young girls who are there just having a nice time?
Mm-hmm. And he was convicted not only of murdering those three little girls, but also the attempted murder of 8 more children and 2 adults. And one of the children who was there at the event said that she felt like he wasn't going to stop. He wanted to kill every single last one of them. And that is, it's fairly unprecedented. It's fairly remarkable to see that kind of level of hatred and violence.
And he took a taxi there, This wasn't just he's walking down the street and decides to do this. This is incredibly calculated. He takes a taxi there. Footage has since been released of him on the way there, refuses to pay the taxi driver, and then goes in. And he actually goes to the wrong place at first. He goes to the mechanic's garage next door. And then so clearly this is what he was aiming towards.
Yeah, he absolutely had in mind where he was heading. He knew exactly where he was going, and it's not somewhere that you'd come across walking by. As you say, it's literally he had to go kind of down a little alleyway. He knew exactly where he was heading. He'd obviously seen this event advertised and knew where he was heading that day.
Yeah.
Had he specifically asked the taxi driver to take him to that location?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it was completely premeditated.
Mm. And so he's never spoken really to explain why he did what he did. But there is an inquiry that's opened to try and get to the bottom of what exactly happened that day, and if he can't tell us why, then to find out really why and what could have been done to prevent it.
Yeah, I went to the initial days of the inquiry that have happened so far, and the opening statement was on the first day, but then the second day was impact statements of 4 of the girls who survived. So they are some of the voices that you don't really hear much about. And the impact that it's had on those, it's horrific. They've been through so much. But one of the girls who was known as C1 in the inquiry, her parents read out about her, and she was featured quite a lot at the time as the girl who got pulled back in. And she'd been in the place when the attack happened, and she'd been looking after 2 of the younger girls when the attack started. She'd been stabbed herself. She had her arms around the other children, protecting them. And then when there was a free time, she told one of them to grab hold of the handrail and get out. So she was doing all that herself, which is like a massive mental strain. But then she managed to get out of the building. Her arm was damaged. So you could see on the CCTV that she was struggling with her arm, and as she got out of the building, he grabbed her and pulled her back in, and she was stabbed 33 times in total. Wow. She was airlifted to Alder Hey Hospital, and I think it was like 4 days of trying to save her life. Luckily she pulled through, but she had, I think it was a 27 centimetre waist, and the knife was 24 centimetres. So she was so lucky to have survived that. But then she's got those scars, and some of the parents were saying these children have got these scars all over their bodies, and as parents you're trying to make them embrace them and that, but they shouldn't have to. And they've had their childhoods and their bodies and stuff completely ruined by this, the physical scars, but then there's like the mental scars as well. and the parents having to try and bring their children through such a horrific situation themselves. It was really hard to listen to those impact statements.
And it's just so shocking because nothing about that environment that those little girls entered that day, 26 little girls who went to do some dance and some yoga, and it just completely couldn't have been a more kind of innocent, childlike activity. And there's nothing that those parents could ever have foreseen happening. It was so out of nowhere. And
one of the little girls, like, when they were talking about her, it sounded just like my niece. My little niece is the same age. She goes to dance with her friends. She makes little friendship bracelets. She goes to see Taylor Swift impersonations and stuff like that. And when they were talking about her, I was like, that could be my niece. She does that every weekend.
Yeah.
They should have been safe. You know, they should be, like, exactly like you're saying. It feels like it should be a place that's safe for them. But what they didn't know is that there is this young man who is becoming increasingly violent, and a long history of that. And, well, interestingly, when the news broke about this case, we didn't actually know. He was never named. So Axel Rudakubana is a name that we have later come to hear. And all we knew is that somebody had attacked all of these people and murdered 3 children. So that was a particularly, I remember at the time, obviously that is what set off some of the worst riots we've seen in our lifetimes.
People fill in the gaps, don't they, and jump to conclusions, whether right or wrong.
Well, and they willingly jumped to conclusions too. I mean, there were bad actors online who published the wrong information, and fairly deliberately wrong information. They said that it was someone who'd come across on a small boat, somebody that was, a Muslim asylum seeker, essentially. None of those things are true, but they filled that vacuum of information with something that plenty of people were happy to grab onto. And so one of the very first things that happened in the wake of this is that a candlelit vigil in Southport was taken over by right-wing extremists who ended up attacking a mosque and then attacking the police who came to defend the mosque. And that precipitated days of rioting in a similar vein across the country, asylum seeker hotels being set on fire. So that lack of information from the police, which is, it's for the normal reasons that the police don't reveal this kind of information. It's meant to be protecting the kind of due process of justice, not prejudicing things. It's normal to not release someone's name in particular until they're charged. But that unfortunately backfired and meant that there was a vacuum of information for bad actors to fill.
You feel like they shouldn't have to say, oh, he was a British citizen. Mm-hmm. But it almost felt like maybe if they had, the riots at least potentially could have been prevented. But who knows, because I suppose people will spread information online to their heart's content.
They will, but obviously we saw the police do things, and I think it's the same police force, isn't it? They do things differently in the wake of the incident at the Liverpool Victory Parade. So it was a Victory Parade, where a car drove into people at the parade, and a lot of people were injured. I think about 100 people injured, 91 people injured, I think. And they immediately said that it was a 51-year-old white British man from Merseyside. And that was obviously, it was unprecedented for them to reveal that level of information, but it was obviously to prevent a similar inference being made that it was a terrorist attack.
Lessons learnt. Yeah.
But it's, so what do we know about him? We know that he was born in the UK.
So it wasn't until August 1st, I think it was, that they actually finally released a picture of him, which was this young schoolboy, had clearly been taken a long time ago.
Yeah, he looked really young.
He looked really young.
Was it the one of him in school uniform in the blazer?
Yeah,
okay, yeah,
that was one of the first.
That was several years before that photo was.
Exactly.
Because he'd been kicked out of school.
Because then what we later see is this quite scary mugshot.
Yeah. He looks demonic.
Where he does look demonic. I mean, I think he looks exactly like what was probably going through his head.
Yeah.
And we do start to learn as they charge him and as they put the case together, which, as we know, and as you said, is the way it should happen, right? Yeah. We shouldn't learn everything about his backstory until it's in the public interest for us to know. And then what we started to learn about Axel Rudakubana was extreme. This was the most, so we knew that he had multiple interactions with the police. We know that he had been referred to Prevent, which is the intervening in terrorism organisation, 3 times. But the problem with every time he went to Prevent is that they said, oh, he doesn't really have an ideology.
No, what they kind of call a mixed ideology, which sort of means that he was interested in a lot of things to do with violence. Like, you know, he had downloaded an Al-Qaeda training manual, but he also was interested in various genocides, and he just was interested in violence, really. But yeah, he hadn't kind of latched onto one particular cause.
No, exactly. But then there's that, you know, it's felt like that had been growing over time, because you see him at one time, he rang Childline himself and said, I think I'm going to kill other people.
What do I do if I want... Yeah, he said, what do I do if I want to kill someone? And I think at that point he was still at school and he was being bullied. Yeah. And he essentially did tell them, that he wanted to kill somebody.
Yeah. And then he was expelled from school for carrying a knife multiple times. And that was some of his interactions with the police prior, is from knife carrying, which we know is a big issue just generally in the UK.
But I think underperceived as a kind of indicator of future risk, I think a lot of the time. I think that somebody making threats is not often taken seriously if it hasn't been followed up with action. And what we know from a lot of the programmes that we make is that actually threats are quite a high indicator for future harm. And he had actually gone into his school after being expelled with a hockey stick and attacked another pupil, one that had nothing to do with bullying him. So there were many signs, I think. And his own family had called the police. We should say about his family, so he was born in the UK, but his parents had come over from Rwanda a few years after the genocide there. And he was actually born in Cardiff, and then they moved to Lancashire. His parents had called the police several times in relation to his behaviour, but we don't know exactly what those incidents were. And I wonder whether they hadn't got as much help as they were perhaps hoping for, and that's maybe why they stopped reaching out for help.
They obviously wanted help to be ringing the police in the first place.
Yeah, and I think for me that attack on going back to his old school and viciously harming other people is one of the biggest indicators, I would say, that we need to go back and look and think, why did nobody intervene at that particular... there's lots of different areas here, but that is harming other people, pre-planning. He clearly decided he wanted to do that. And we actually know that a week before the Southport murders, he had tried to get in a taxi to go back to that school again, but his dad stopped him. Mm-hmm. So who knows actually what other plans he had. Yeah. But we'll see what the inquiry discovers. But from my perspective, at that point, there's got to be some serious intervention for an incredibly violent young man.
Yeah. And actually, when the police raided his family home, searched the family home after his arrest, they found, amongst other things, they found a lot of weapons. They also found a tub containing ricin underneath his bed, which apparently is at 1 milligram is enough to kill a person, and there was an awful lot more than that. And so they found a lot of indications there that he was very interested in harm and had intentions to cause harm. And I mean, I know one of the things that the inquiry is going to be looking at is what his parents knew, how much they knew, and whether they could have done anything differently as well. So it's not something that we can say too much about, but I think the signs were there that this person was a risk to society.
Yeah, the inquiry is going to be in 2 phases. The first phase is listening to all the evidence, looking at the background, trying to get an idea of why this happened, how it was able to happen. And then phase 2 will be taking all of the phase 1 findings and presenting them to the Home Office to see what can be done in future to stop anything like this happening again, whether measures can be changed, whether there were any failings, and how lessons can be learnt to move forward. So I think from the inquiry there's going to be a lot of information that comes out, but there are a lot of agencies lined up to sort of be looked into, and I don't think any of them are solely to blame for anything. There's a lot of failings.
Yeah, because one of the things we haven't said is, I don't think, is that he he'd had interactions with mental health services too, but that he had sort of stopped engaging with them, and at that point there's not that much that they can do because they can't force them to engage. And it's something that we've seen in other kind of random sort of stranger attacks that take place, is that this person has had interaction with mental health services, their family have been very worried about their behaviour, but you can't force a person to engage with that kind of service. So, I mean, I think that probably one of the things that will come out of the inquiry is that all of those different agencies don't necessarily communicate that well with one another, which, again, I mean, I don't know why, but I'm assuming that's a problem of resources a lot of the time.
Yeah, and I think what from my take on it, and I'm, this is just me and my opinion, but it was like he kind of got picked up by the police. They did what they can do. Oh, he doesn't fit in our box. Prevent. Oh, he doesn't really fit in what we're providing here. Mental health. He didn't engage, or so it's like all those different interactions. There wasn't a service that could have intervened at that point, particularly because of the ideology. So I think actually Keir Starmer was quoted after about talking about how, terrorism is changing. We are the traditional form of terrorism, are groups all working together. And I think he said in Parliament after about how, we need to now be careful about these lone individuals that are forming their own ideology. It does sound like Rudakubana was influenced by things he read online and things like that, but he's one young man working alone.
Yeah, and what is the threshold for something being an ideology? Like, he was full of rage and hatred by the sounds of things. There has been sort of talk that he was driven by misogyny, and that's why he targeted a place that was only women and little girls. But at the same time, perhaps he's a coward who targeted people that couldn't defend themselves as much as anything. And when does something become an ideology? When does something cross over from somebody that's actually just rage-filled and hateful to being an ideology? Because the definition of terrorism, as I understood it, is that you're trying to influence change or cause fear. And I don't know whether random attacks by individuals kind of fit that threshold. I mean, what is the benefit to them categorising someone like Axel Rudakubana as kind of under the terrorism umbrella?
I suppose it just means that then prevent are the ones who have to deal with him. It's assigning him a label that means he can then go and, be addressed by that particular organisation, I suppose.
But what I'm not sure about is what Prevent do that would be different to what any other agency would do.
And could he ever have been stopped?
There's a lot of, he was known to the police, they should have been able to stop him, he was on watch lists and stuff. The amount of people that are on watch lists that don't go on to do anything, but you mentioned resources before. There is no way you could monitor everybody that is on those watch lists constantly. And you don't know which ones are going to carry out stuff.
And actually, when those kind of restrictive rules are put on people's lives because they're on watch lists, that they, curfews and all this kind of stuff, then the police and the authorities are accused of being heavy-handed and of kind of imposing on those people's human rights and ability to live a normal life. So the police, I would say, are reasonably hamstrung by things like that.
Yeah, it is a hard balance to know, if we had that benefit of time to try and stop him, what could have been done. So I'll be really interested to see what the inquiry does say. But so my dad is actually from Southport and all of my family are from Southport. And my cousin actually still teaches at one of the schools of the little girls that died. And so I've spoken to her about the community and the amazing things that community have been doing to try and recover and grieve from probably the most horrific thing that's happened there.
Because it's not a big place. I've never been to Southport, but I'm assuming it's a place where people generally know one another and feel part of that community.
They do. Everyone knows everyone, and it is very much a community feel. And the families have started various charities actually that everyone's been getting involved in, and
the families of the girls who were killed.
Died, yeah. And 2 of their dads ran the London Marathon, which I thought was absolutely incredible because
less than a year after
every step of that 26 miles, they must have been, just feeling that grief. So it's so impressive.
They're like also thinking about how to, have more grief services going forward in the communities and what can be done. So they're still like even thinking about other people whilst managing their own grief, which is just so impressive. And I know that there's like various plans to redo parts of Southport town centre that is using some of those funds as well. So I definitely get the sense from what my family have told me that Southport are not going to let this be the legacy. The people involved in this that have been through the most horrific thing ever are going to try and find hope and positivity in the darkest of places, which I think is really impressive. And he might have gone there with the intention that day of the worst thing that can ever happen, and they won't let that be how their daughters are remembered.
It's pretty amazing. So he pleaded guilty in the end to the crimes that he was accused of, and his sentencing was broadcast live on TV, as sometimes happens now. And actually, I know that the BBC in particular chose not to broadcast all of the details of the judge's sentencing remarks because they were pretty brutal. But the sentence he got was 52 years. Because he was 17 at the time of the murders, he couldn't get a whole life tariff, which he would almost certainly have got, because he went out to kill children in a premeditated fashion, which absolutely ticks the boxes for a whole life tariff. There has been an appeal that they think it's unduly lenient. He's going to be 70 by the time, if he's released. Even then, he's going to be 70. But what do you think about the sentence?
Yeah, it's hard because the judge did give the maximum that the law can allow because he was under the age of 18. But I'm glad there's an appeal, because it's actually, well, should we look at that and should we say we need to make an exception to the law this time? Yes, he might have been under the age of 18, but he knew what was right and what was wrong. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, and the fact it was premeditated and he had a history of stuff. This isn't something that went wrong or a reaction on the day that's then led to this. This was a series of events that have led to this moment. One of the children that survived, her mum and dad gave a statement. They said that they've managed to get through this by keeping quite anonymous and not wanting any press, any publicity sort of focused around their daughter because she'd been through enough already. They didn't really want to get involved with the inquiry as such, but they felt it was important because lessons need to be learned and they need to give as much information that can help that in the end. And one of the reasons why they wanted to get involved as well is because their daughter showed so much bravery on that day, and they want, when she looks back and sees all of this negativity online and all of the things that have happened, they want to be able to say, you did this, you were so brave, and that's out there as well. Your story's out there. And one thing that we were told at the inquest as well, the press were briefed not to use photos, the mugshots, not to mention him by name. From now on in the inquiry, he's not going to be named as such with the victims because they don't want to keep putting the victims through that, which I think is really respectful. But hopefully they can use this to find out what went wrong and get some justice for those victims.
So what's the next sort of process in the inquiry? What's going to happen next?
So the next step is to look at the different evidence from what happened on the day, from the injuries that were received by the people. They've got the adult victims. So there's the parents of the children who were killed, and then there's obviously the adults who were stabbed as well. Then there's going to be evidence from the different agencies talking about what they knew and their findings. There'll be scrutiny on all of the different things that they've got to offer. And then once that's all concluded, that information will then be packaged up as to how can we learn from this.
It'll be really interesting to see what does change. I mean, one of the things that really struck me that the dance teacher, Leanne Lucas, said was that people say there should be more security on events that children are attending. And she's saying, no, there should be more done to stop people going out and doing what Axel Rudakubana did in the first place. And I think that's surely what this inquiry has got to be looking at, is that how do you make sure this doesn't happen again? Because you shouldn't be having to put fences around children to stop people attacking them. You should be stopping the attacks, stopping these people wanting to do these attacks in the first place. So I think that's hopefully what will be the outcome of this.
I think the bravery of all of the parents of some of the children who survived, and also of Alice, Bibi and Elsie, the bravery that they're showing now, coming through and, contributing to the inquiry or raising money for charities, and having that strength to still go on and do that is so impressive after everything.
I just want to curl up in a ball and not ever see anyone ever again. And the fact that they're going out and bringing so much positivity and light and stuff to such a horrible situation.
And it is the cliche, but it's that situation where you see the absolute worst of humanity in someone like Axel Rudakubana, and then you see the best of humanity in the way that people have responded, and it does give you a little bit of hope.
No, it definitely does. And, another thing, the day after the riots and the attacks on the Southport mosque, The community came together and rebuilt that mosque. Yeah. And I think, you know, the incredible work that the parents of the victims are doing, and the fact that Southport is going to move forward with hope and, you know, with a great legacy left behind for Elsie, Alice and Bibi.
Thanks, Anna, and thank you, Joe. Thank you to everyone for joining us, and we'll see you next time on the True Crime Uncut podcast.